What's up, guys? I'm Laura from Reading in Bed, and I know I've been teasing about a griping about the Giller Prize video. This is not quite going to be that. The long list was announced just an hour and a half ago. I'm going to start with a more quantitative analysis of the long list. I'm a market researcher in my day job, so that just kind of makes sense for me to start by looking at the data and the numbers, and then start bitching about things. Also, I want to give Jason Purcell a chance to come down from defending his master's thesis. We'd kind of talked about maybe doing a video together about the Giller. Don't know if it'll happen. We're both very busy people, but that's happening for him today. So I want to give him a chance to kind of like get that out of the way, and then maybe I'll reach out to him and we'll do something along those lines. So today I'm just going to go through the list and I'm going to give you the numbers, a bit of an analysis. I'll give you some of my opinions at the end. And before I read out the list, I just want to mention that one of the judges this year is Heather O'Neill. This is her latest book. And she is one of my favorite authors, so I was very excited, very much anticipating this long list, and I think I do see her influence in it, so we'll get to that, but in the meantime, do check out her brand new Bookstagram account. She is killing it. It's actually her and her daughter Arizona, and they have released an image for each of the long listed books paired with a location in the Montreal subway. Like, it sounds crazy, but it works really well. Okay, so I'm just going to read the list and then we'll get into some of the numbers. So the first book is called Zolitude by Paige Cooper. The second is French Exit by Patrick deWitt. The third is Songs for the Cold of Heart. It's a very can-lit title by Eric Dupont. The fourth is Washington Black by Edugyan. The fifth is Beirut Hellfire Society by Rawi Hage. Number 6 is Motherhood by Sheila Heti. Number 7 is Our Homesick Songs by Emma Hooper. Number 8 is An Ocean of Minutes by Thea. Number 9 is Something for Everyone by Lisa Moore. Number 10 is Split Tooth by Tanya Tagaq. Number 11 is V by Kim Thúy. And number 12 is Jonny Appleseed by Joshua Whitehead. And I'm just going to start off with some of the author characteristics, and I know there's lots of you out there who say I don't care about the author's biography. Well, you know, a lot of people do, so we're starting there. So if we start with gender, we've got 8 out of these 12 books written by women, and we have 1 written by a Two-Spirit author. So Two-Spirit is an indigenous kind of gender identity. It's not the same as transgender, but it probably falls under the umbrella of gender non-conforming, so you can Google and read more about that. I'm not an expert by any means, but if we take all that into account, we've got 9 out of 12 of these authors that are women or gender non-conforming. And if we take a look at race or authors of color, we've got a pretty even split between white or, you know, European descended authors and authors of color. And I think we've only got 1 author who was not born in Canada. There, you know, seems to be a lot of sort of immigrant stories and those kind of narratives being very prominent in CanLit in the last couple of years and still, but this year we may see a little less of that. We'll see. And then I want to talk a little bit about generation. Those of you who know me or follow me on social media will know that I'm a little obsessed maybe with generational boundaries and in calling out Gen X erasure, because like every tweet that has something to say about millennials, which so many do, is often pitting boomers against millennials and not acknowledging that there is an entire generation in between that's Gen X. And I also like to recognize another, like an in-between of the in-between. There's sort of that Gen X / millennial on the cusp generation that some people call Xennial. I fall into that one, so of course that's why I'm interested in it. So when we take a look at this list, it is very Gen X heavy. So of the 12, there are 8 Gen Xers and 3 that fall into that Xennial kind of in-betweener one. There are 2 boomers and 2 millennials. Now, this being a, you know, a CanLit kind of list, not every author had the kind of robust Wikipedia page that included their birth year. So I do want to mention that there's 2 authors who I had to guess. Paige Cooper, who's nominated for, longlisted for Zolitude, couldn't find a birth year. I'm labeling her as an Xennial because she just seems like she's about the same age as me. There's one interview in particular where she listed a bunch of her most memorable characters, and I noticed that one of them was She-Ra, and I think that millennials might be a little too young to remember She-Ra. I could be totally off about that. So that's why I put her there. And then the other one was Thea Lim, who's longlisted for An Ocean of Minutes. Again, I just started reading through some interviews and I noticed she used the word side hustle. So she got pegged as a millennial. So apologies if I'm wrong on either of those, but I mean, I'm not going to be far off. Like, neither of them are boomers, that's for sure. They're both either Gen X or millennial, and I just kind of, you know, categorize them as I saw fit. And even the two boomers who are on this list, who are Rawi, Hage and Lisa Moore, are also really borderline. They're both born in 1964, so had they been born even a couple of months later, I would be lumping them in with Gen X. So this is a youngish list. If we look at the Man Booker, I believe they had 4 millennials on their list. You know, here we have maybe 2. The only one I'm sure of is Joshua Whitehead. Like, he is for sure a millennial, and even in his book, like by the pop culture references, you can tell. But yeah, so it's young leaning, but not super young. We've got a core of Gen X writers. You know, they're not quite old guard canlit, but they're certainly not new, inexperienced debut novelists either, which I think is a great thing. You've got, you know, the benefits of both, of not being kind of the old stodgy writers that we've heard from a million times, might have something new to say, but they're not, you know, sort of the debut 25-year-old writing a semi-autobiographical coming-of-age story. So looking pretty good from the generational perspective. Now, the last thing I want to comment on in terms of authors' biographies and whatnot, I have to go there, is the UBC Accountable thing. I'm not going to recap that in its entirety, but basically 2 years ago, there was an open letter published defending supposedly due process, but really it was defending the author Stephen Galloway, who was fired from his job at the University of British Columbia after several allegations of, you know, sexual assault, sexual harassment, etc. Don't at me, Google it if you want to read about it. But I mean, we're coming like 2 years after Madeleine Tien won the Giller, and she was not only a signatory, but one of the vanguard really of that movement, to this year where we actually have 0 current signatories. Now, there are 2 authors on this list who originally signed that open letter and removed their names earlier this year. Those are Lisa Moore and Rawi Hage, notably the 2 boomers, and Rawi Hage notably is Madeleine Tien's husband. So I'll just, you know, that's all I'm going to say about that. So moving on from looking at the authors and their biographies, let's talk a bit about the books. So we have 12 books here, and 2 of them are short story collections. So the Giller Prize is kind of notable for allowing short story collections into the mix, and sometimes they win. Hellfire by, it's not called Hellfire, I messed that up, but Lynn Cody's short story collection, Hell Going, I think, won in 2014, and I think there's been at least one other short story collection that has won. We also have 1 book in translation, so that's Songs for the Cold of Heart by Eric Dupont. Apologize, I didn't write down the translator's name, but that's kind of the cool thing too with the Giller Prize and with CanLit, is that we get some French language novels and short story collections in the mix. In terms of debut novels, so this is one thing, you know, in my bitching about the Booker video, this came up a lot. Not only the youth of some of the authors, but the lack of experience. Some people really don't think that debut authors should be like allowed to win literary prizes, which I don't agree with, but that's an opinion people have. I think we have 1 real debut author who hasn't had a book out before, and that would be Tanya Tagaq. But I mean, she is so well known and such a force, you know, in Canada for her music that I almost, it feels weird to call her a debut anything. Like, she's been around for a long time. I believe she's won a Polaris Prize. She's collaborated with Bjork. Like, she's, you know, she's a very well known person in Canada in entertainment. although I believe this is a debut book from her. And then we've got, you know, someone like Joshua Whitehead, who this is a debut novel for him, but he previously published a poetry collection. I think someone on here is, you know, they previously published a novella, which for some reason, like, people often don't get credited with novellas, you know, like they're still called a debut novelist. I don't really get that either. But the point is, there's not a lot of, like true debuts going on here. Again, because these folks mostly are Gen X, which means they're mostly kind of in their 40s-ish. They're, you know, it's not their first rodeo, as we say. And then in terms of small presses, we have 5 out of 12 of these books being published by small presses in Canada, which is kind of cool. Let's see. So I think that's all I wanted to say on kind of the book characteristics. I'll talk just briefly about some of the snubs, and then I'll tell you a bit about like where my reading's going to go. So notably not longlisted, I would say Warlight by Michael Ondaatje. Now, I don't know if that's because his publisher didn't put it forward or if he asked not to be considered, because I believe with his last novel, The Cat's Table, he either asked not to be longlisted at all, or maybe he was longlisted and then asked to be removed so he wouldn't get shortlisted. You know, he's won it. He's won the Booker. He is longlisted for the Booker right now, so I think he's like, I'm good. Another sort of old guard Canlit, I don't have the new book, but David Adams Richards has a new one called Mary Sear. And I don't think his last couple have been longlisted. Like this one won, I think back in 2000, but he hasn't been longlisted lately, I don't think. But yeah, another maybe notable omission. I was sort of surprised not to see The Boat People by Sharon Bella, which was much talked about when it was on Canada Reads. And who else? Richard Wagamese could have been longlisted posthumously, but he wasn't for Starlight, which I haven't read yet either. Probably the most surprising to me right now is that Women Talking by Miriam Toews was not longlisted. She's previously been longlisted for 2 of her novels. A Complicated Kindness is probably her best known, also All My Puny Sorrows. And this book is getting incredible buzz, and not the kind of buzz that makes me think, you know, but like good buzz, like the kind where I actually do want to read it. So yeah, I was really surprised not to see that one. And then I was almost surprised not to see the new Eden Robinson, Trickster Drift, but turns out it's not published till October 2nd, so she just missed the cutoff. So those were my notable omissions. I'm sure there's others that I've missed. So back to me, this is my channel. So of these books, the one that I've read is Jonny Appleseed by Joshua Whitehead. So when I get into my gripin, I'll talk a little more about this. I was surprised to see it there. I enjoyed this book, but I don't think it was great. I don't think it's, you know, yeah, we'll get into that. So just, I've read 1 out of 12. There's, where did I want to go with this one? So, oh yeah, those of you who've been watching my videos know that I'm concentrating on translated fiction and literature by people of color this year. So given those guidelines, translated or authors of color, there are 7 of these books kind of fit my criteria. I've already read 1, so there's 6 more that I could read, but really only 3 that I'm interested in. So the first of those would be Washington Black by S.E. Edugyan. I have her previous novel right here. And yeah, this was sort of a I liked it but didn't love it situation, but given that she's longlisted for the Booker, now longlisted for the Giller, it's like, okay, yes, I'll probably give in to the pressure. The reviews have been pretty mixed. That doesn't really put me off though. So the other ones I'm interested in, An Ocean of Minutes. I kind of like looked at that before. The author, or the title is just kind of so blah to me. I'm like, oh God. But in, you know, reading a bit more about it, I am kind of interested in it now. And then lastly, and the one I'm most excited to see on this list probably is Split Tooth by Tanya Tagaq. Like I said, just because I know her from her music already. And even though it sounds kind of similar in tone and form to books like Heartberries, sort of that auto-fiction, blurring the lines between biography and fiction, and which doesn't always work for me, but I'm certainly willing to give it a chance. So, you know, I put it on hold. I think I'm 17th in line, so we'll see how many they order. So that's it for today. That's all I want to say. Like I said, we'll get into some griping. I want to see what people say. Given the things people are griping about with the Booker and now the National Book Award, they're probably going to have the same things to gripe about here, you know, with not so much super young and debut, but let's say younger and less experienced, perhaps, novelists than maybe some people expected to see. Personally, I'm pretty good with this list so far, but I'm sure I'll find something to complain about. So thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more.